So if you clicked onto this video, you guys probably want to learn more about why your competitive games are not going well. Now believe me, I've had my fair share of rough games on my climb to eternity. It wasn't easy to climb to the top 0.1%, but trust me gentlemen, with the next few minutes of your time, and I assure you that you will learn why you are losing your competitive games and how to start winning them consistently. So let's get straight into the video and pose the question, why are you losing your ranked games? And a lot of you are probably not going to like my answer to this question, but the hard truth and answer to this question is that you are not doing enough to win the game. Now hear me out and let me explain my point a little bit further before you click off the video. Essentially, my point is that many games that you will lose will not technically be your fault. However, you could have theoretically done more to win the game. And there is a general rule that most players accept called the 70-30 rule. Basically, at least 70% of all of your games will be winnable and 30% of your games will be unwinnable. Depending on what rank you're in, you could even say that 80% of your games are winnable. This is due to various different reasons such as enemy smurfs, team disconnects, or just general team gaps. But the most common reason for the 30% of games that are unwinnable is bad teammates. So if this is the case, then how can high elo players like myself climb to eternity with 92% win rates? It's honestly a simple answer, as higher elo players are able to hard carry bad teammates consistently. It is really that simple. The Spider-Man that is 1 in 13 might be really heavy, however, higher elo players are still able to carry them. Now, many of you will not be in eternity, so if you do have throwing or bad teammates, you can still absolutely hard carry them. And it only gets easier to carry the lower in rank that you go. So if you don't think that you can do this, then you are really selling yourself short. And I'm hopefully going to convince you that it is not that difficult to be the carry. It's also important to note that you won't always have bad teammates, but the principles that I will be teaching you still apply to close games with a good team. Now, you may be wondering, how do I do this and how do I become the hard carry for my team? First, you may have to accept the fact that the characters you play may not be the best or easiest to carry with. Essentially, you want the best players on your team, which will be you in the future, on the characters that can carry the most. So I've created here a tier list for each respective role on the characters that have the highest carry potential. So let's speedrun through the list and let me explain why I ranked the characters where I did. First, let's start with the role with the lowest carry potential, the supports. Now, I don't want to make it seem like I'm hating on the supports too hard here. However, for the purposes of this video, supports do have the lowest carry potential. So I am going to rank the highest supports, the supports with the most carry potential in B tier. So essentially all the supports, the ones that are ranked the highest have the most outplayability in their kits. So they're the ones that are going to have consistent damage. They're going to have good stuns, and then they're going to have abilities that can outplay ultimates. So that's things like Adam Warlock Soul Bond. That's things like Invisible Woman Stun or Loki Lamp. And then obviously Mantis and Luna and Adam, they can all pump out crazy damage. Now the healers that are going to be lower ranked in terms of carry potential, of course, it's going to be healers like Jeff the Shark, Cloak, and Rocket, because they are typically heal bots. Now, Jeff the Shark, I know there's an interesting playstyle on him, but that's a little too niche for this video, so we're going to just keep him lower, as most players will be playing him as a heal bot. Let's move on to our next role, in the role with the most carry potential, DPS. So for the DPS, the characters that are ranked the highest are going to be the characters that have the highest pick potential and the highest ability to make solo plays without relying on too much extra support. So for example, that's going to be characters like Hawkeye, Hela, Neymar, and Bucky, as they can consistently get picks just by hitting their shots. This is also going to be characters like Psylocke, Black Panther, and Magic, as they can hit flanks more consistently and don't need any extra support to get the eliminations in the backline. Now for the characters that are going to be ranked lower, it's kind of going to be the inverse of that. They may have consistent damage or pick potential, like Spider-Man and Iron Fist. They do have pick potential. However, they kind of rely too much on either the enemy team not being coordinated enough to deal with them, or rely too much on extra support from other divers to assist in getting the kill. Let's move on to our third and final role, Vanguard or Tank. So for the tank characters that are ranked the highest, it's going to be somewhat similar to the DPS tier list in that they have the highest kill pressure and the highest pick potential. So that's going to be characters like Groot, Thor, Doctor Strange. Thor, for example, you can consistently get picks in the backline by yourself, just by popping your empowered form. Similarly, Doctor Strange has a pretty consistent one-shot combo, and Groot is just insane. He's probably the best tank in the game right now, so that's why he's ranked where he is. For the tank characters that are ranked lower, it's going to be due to them creating passive value for your team and it being very difficult for them to get these eliminations and picks on their own. So, for example, on Captain America and Venom, the value you're going to be creating is by pressuring the enemy backline, but it's very difficult on these characters to get the eliminations yourself. So you do rely on your team in that sense. And to climb, and the whole point of this video is to not rely on your team. So I would say that they have lower carry potential.
So I'm sure many of you know how to play most characters in this game, but for those of you that don't, I suggest that you pick 2 characters within the A or S tier categories for 2 different roles and learn them all to a point where you feel comfortable playing any one of them. This allows you some flexibility, so if your hero gets banned or insta-locked, then you still have a backup hero to carry on. And I know this is a little tangent, however, I understand that learning new heroes can be challenging, so I wanted to explain my approach to learning new heroes. What I suggest you do is open the leaderboard and click into the profiles of any of the top 100 players and watch how they play the heroes you want to learn. Watching the best players in the world play these characters can make a huge difference when learning them. If you want an alternative to this, I also have an unranked to Grandmaster with no mechanic series with 3 parts out currently that feature many of the A to S tier heroes. Other than that, I would recommend playing ranked when learning these heroes, but don't focus solely on winning initially, rather focus on improvement. Whenever you make a mistake or lose the team fight, think to yourself why the fight was lost and how you could have possibly improved to win the team fight. With focusing on this idea of constant improvement, I'm confident that you will learn these heroes quickly.
Now that you know how to approach learning new heroes, let's talk about how to actually be the hard carry. So to carry, you need to provide your team with the most value. And what is the best way to create value? Well, it depends on the role. So let's start off with the supports. So the best way to create value on support is to negate the biggest threat every fight. Now this is a pretty broad idea and it could mean a bunch of different things, but the most obvious example is enemy offensive ultimates. The easiest and most consistent way to do this is by using your support defensive ultimate to save your team from the enemy offensive ultimates. This is a very important job that supports have. You should always be aware and prepared to use your ultimate to counter the enemy offensive ultimates. This idea can be expanded even further as many supports also have stuns that can cancel ultimates within their windup. For example, Mantis and Luna can stun Doctor Strange out of his ultimate. Alternatively, Invisiwoman can displace Doctor Strange as he is winding up in his ultimate. Now, it's important to note that the greatest threat to your team will not always just be ultimates. For example, it can also be a coordinated dive from the enemy team. Recognizing where a dive is coming from and who they are targeting, then allocating the proper resources to your teammate can entirely shut down the enemy dive and give your team a much better chance at winning the fight. You should proactively expect what the greatest enemy threat is and look to shut it down. And this is how you can set yourself apart from other sports in your rank. Now, aside from this, there are a few other things that you can learn to set yourself apart, like learning correct healing prioritization, looking to make offensive plays when healing is not needed, and positioning yourself to expand line of sight as much as possible without putting yourself into too much danger. But overall, support is by far the hardest role to carry on, so for the purposes of this video, I don't recommend that you play support unless you have to flex. I'm really not hating on support here, I just don't think that it is the easiest role to carry the game on. Let's move on to the next and easiest role to carry on, DPS. The best and first way to create value on DPS is to get solo eliminations and picks during teamfights. Getting picks early, especially on supports, just about wins the teamfight outright. This requires timing, positioning, and landing your shots. A few great examples of this would be landing a hook on Bucky and following up with the elimination, or timing a flank on Magic, on an isolated healer and landing your one-shot combo, or even as Hawkeye, just landing a headshot on a squishy target. These types of plays are the ones that you want to learn how to do consistently. Once you can consistently get picks, you will notice how much easier the team fights become. Really try to focus on getting solo eliminations and landing your combos or shots. Moving on, the second way to create value is to force high value resources. Some examples of high value resources are any enemy support ultimates, Cloak and Dagger Bubble, Loki Lamp, and Adam Warlock Soulbond. You can do this by applying pressure to these characters while they have their high valuable cooldowns. Even if you know you can't confirm the kill, if you can force their high valuable abilities,
then it creates a window of opportunity after those abilities are done for yourself and your team to capitalize on. Now, a quick side note on the topic of enemy defensive ultimates is that when you are playing to solo carry, you shouldn't necessarily be looking to go for a play with your ultimate if you know the enemy supports have theirs. Most times, support players, especially in lower elo, will use their ultimate either to engage or sustain through fights, even if you haven't ulted yet. So most times, it is worth waiting for their supports to counter your other teammates' ultimates, especially if you are on a hero like Bucky or Star-Lord, or really any character with a strong ultimate. Moving on to the third way to create value is to shut down the enemy's best player. You should be aware of who on the enemy team is creating a problem for your own team. If they are hard carrying and creating a problem for your team, you should look to be the person who swaps to counter them and deny them that pressure. An example of this would be a Black Panther or Spider-Man that is destroying your team's backline. You swapping to Namor or Bucky and shutting down their dives will create an insane amount of value for your team. Now, learning how to hard carry on DPS might take some time if you're new to the role. However, it is the most consistent role that you can carry on, and it is by far the easiest and fastest way to climb out of low elo. I would especially recommend playing DPS if you are confident in your aiming ability. Even if you aren't confident in your aiming ability, you could just pick Hawkeye every game and just learn how to consistently hit your shots, or at least consistently get picks, and you will climb so fast, man. It's unbelievable. Let's move on to the final role, tanks. The best way to create value on tank is taking space, and more importantly, holding space. Let's first talk about taking space. The main idea of taking space is to open additional angles and routes for your DPS/team to play off of. It also allows for your supports to position in better, more defensible spots around the map. To take space, you need to recognize the windows of opportunity when the enemy's team's resources are most limited. For example, when Doctor Strange's shield is broken, Magneto doesn't have bubble, or even if the enemy tank's HP is low. Now, taking space is relatively easy to understand and do, however, holding space is where many players fail. A lot of holding space comes down to cooldown management. Essentially, you want to go as long as possible without having to use your defensive cooldowns. The error that most people make is using these cooldowns while under little threat. The problem this creates is when the actual threat does come, you don't have anything to counteract it. For example, if you get hit by a Hawkeye arrow on Magneto, it doesn't mean to instantly pop your bubble on yourself, but rather you could position behind cover or even trust your supports to heal you. A big part of taking/holding space depends on your own health pool, so you need to be hyper aware of your health at all times and position accordingly. Essentially, if you have high health, you can look to be more aggressive, and with low health, look to give up space and play passive until your HP is back up. There is another level to taking or holding space, which is denying enemy off angles on high grounds or supporting your own teammates by holding high ground positions. Certain tanks like Thor, Hulk, or Venom are not really designed to hold large amounts of space on main choke points. Rather, they specialize in challenging off angles and harder to reach power positions. Anytime an enemy DPS tries to take a high ground or power position, you should look to take a duel with them and deny them that space. Moving on to the second way to create value on tank, peeling for your team. Especially against dive or high mobility comps, holding space becomes less important, so look to support your backline. Some examples would be as Magneto, bubble/shield your squishies, as the Thing, dash to your teammates and provide damage resist, and as Strange, block ultimates with your shield. Tanks can provide massive defensive value to your team, and you should be constantly looking for ways to counter enemy dives and ultimates. Let's move on to the final way to create value, and arguably the strongest and best way to create value. I kind of couldn't decide whether taking space or this should be the best, but regardless, the third way is getting solo eliminations and picks. This is pretty much the same idea as carrying on DPS. You can absolutely frag out. Some tanks excel at this better than others, but the ones who do it best are Thor, Groot, Strange, and Hulk. In conclusion, gentlemen, you can do more to win your games. Put yourself into situations where you are the playmaker on your team. Take that responsibility away from your Make-A-Wish teammates. This way, you won't have to rely on bad teammates to fill this role, as there is nothing more damaging to a team in Marvel Rivals than having a bad player in a carry-heavy position. Would you rather have the worst player on your team playing Spider-Man, or would you rather have them playing Rocket? It's a no-brainer every time. You would so much rather
have them on rocket. So in short, apply the principles that I have taught you today and learn to carry and become the alpha threat. If this all sounds like too much work for you, which I understand there's a lot of information in this video, then you could just pick Hela every game and get good at clicking heads. I mean, you'll probably climb pretty fast doing that as well. If you guys are looking for more educational content, I did upload a tips video on tank. So if you guys are looking for some niche tips or how to improve your game on tank, go ahead and watch this video. Appreciate it, boys. Like, comment, subscribe. We'll be seeing you.